Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today with all of you, and of course, our speaker of the day, Paul McDonagh-Smith, to talk about frameworks for capitalizing AI. I'm Christine Gonzalez, Senior Associate Director of Digital Deliveries at MIT Sloan Executive Education. And some of you may be familiar with MIT Sloan Exec Ed, but in case you aren't, Executive Education at MIT offers a wide range of non-degree courses across various business topics and cutting-edge content coming from MIT faculty. Paul McDonagh-Smith, who we have here with us today, is a senior lecturer in information technology at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and he teaches in multiple programs in executive education and elsewhere at MIT. Paul creates key intersection points between technology and business, and his many programs in exec ed range from AI to virtual technology to metaverse technologies. Paul and I have worked together for over a decade on various digital experiments and initiatives, and I'm really excited to be talking to him today about this topic. So, Paul, without further ado, I'm happy to hand it over to you to get us started.
Well, thank you, Christine. As you say, we've been working together for over a decade now, so it's lovely to kind of now today have this conversation to talk about different types of frameworks and different types of approaches that will allow us and enable us all to unlock more of the potential of artificial intelligence and the suite of technologies and techniques that actually sit within its continuum as well. So everybody, some of you out there, I'm sure we've kind of crossed paths before, so thank you for coming back to listen to us today. For those of you that I haven't met before, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you and to spend this time with you as well. So just a tiny little bit about myself. I wear two hats here at MIT Sloan. The first of which kind of Christine kind of introduced as a senior lecturer in the IT and kind of exec ed kind of groups. The second hat I wear is that of digital capability leader, where Christine and I kind of and our digital team work on strengthening, maintaining, growing a portfolio of digital programs, experimenting with a series of technologies and business models, in fact, to get more from the portfolio and get more from the work that we're doing with digital technologies, and also work together with colleagues across the Institute on questions pertaining to digital strategy. And that aspect of experimentation, of exploration, is going to be key to today's discussion. It's also compounded by the other thing that I do as well. I'm an advisor to NASA Goddard, working under the supervision of Dr. Jim B. Garvin, who kind of leads up the Venus work, the Da Vinci Plus mission for 2028 to 29. I kind of help out a little bit on that, and also help out on something called the Discovery Program, which again is around business model innovation. So as we go through today's session, please excuse me, or kind of don't be too surprised if every now and then there's a weaving in of some considerations of business model as well as technology-driven innovation. So thank you. Lovely to be with you all here today. So, Christine, do you have any questions for me?
Sure. All right, let's jump right in. So we recently launched the Leading the AI-Driven Organization course. Can you share a little bit about the aims, the objectives, the outputs of that course with us? What are the takeaways there?
Yeah, but I'll be super pleased to do that. I'll just take a few minutes because there's so many other things that we want to get into as well. So in lots of ways, I'd probably kind of characterize the Leading the AI-Driven Organization program as a 5-act play. So we have 5 days, so it kind of neatly fits that kind of metaphor. And each day we really have a series of sessions that really look to push home some key learnings, some key insights on particular areas. Day 1 really is all about getting to know AI. And that's kind of interesting because it's not simply a case of all of the definitions. It's also around the differences. You know, we have the deans of MIT Sloan School of Management and of MIT Schwarzman College of Computing kick the proceedings off. And then we actually kind of begin to explore, we pull the curtain back on the technologies and the techniques themselves, recognize the patterns that kind of pull them together in that type of a continuum, but also identify the things that make them different and unique within their families. So we start with that, then we get into focusing on the business impact. That's Act 2. Act 3 is around optimization of applications of AI and its family members, machine learning, deep learning, generative AI, all of these on a pathway to artificial general intelligence. Before, in Act 4, we focus on the human elements. Of course, as you all know, working in your organizations, it's nigh on impossible, at the very least, kind of perhaps not very wise, to be looking at these technologies in isolation. Okay, it's very much a human-centric type of approach that's required if we want to unlock the potential. And then we finish up in the 5th act by talking about the trajectory of AI. So where we are today into where we are reasonably moving towards in the very near future. So in essence, I suppose, that the program is focused on giving us all a suitcase. Marvin Minsky, in his book, The Emotion Machine, talks about AI, coined the term suitcase word for explaining those types of terms or technologies that escape easy or singular types of definition. And we think AI, and Marvin Minsky did, so if it's good enough for him to think that, we'll kind of give it a shot as well. We think it's a suitcase term. So we take that metaphor through the program and really with the participants and all the participants working together as well, it's a very, very hands-on type of program. We actually pack a suitcase of frameworks, of cultural kind of elements, so we can activate the right type of mindset in our organizations, and also aspects of a digital language. So there's lots gets packed into the program, and ultimately, perhaps if I would try to recognize one kind of consistent pattern, it's that of consilience. So we try to consilience the concept of unity and unification. We try to help those in the class unify the way their organization was previously or prior to AI being such an important kind of element to the way it will be here in the present and moving forward. So we unify the aspects of the workforce, aspects of the strategy, aspects of the considerations around their relationship with data, and lots of other kind of elements as well, so that they have an opportunity to kind of create here in the present an organization that can be AI forward. Christine.
That's great, Paul. So I think a lot of us would be curious to know, everyone is kind of running towards Gen AI and applications of AI, and how do those outputs relate, in your opinion? What do you think? How do those outputs really relate to the way in which you're seeing AI and Gen AI being applied effectively today in business?
Yeah, I think the first point I would make is it's not, strictly speaking, kind of course, that the way that I see it, but perhaps the insights I'll share come from the conversations we're very fortunate to have within the MIT ecosystem and those clients and those kind of organizations that we visit and spend time with as well. So I'll share some perspectives. And what I should say, of course, is in a sense, I'm preaching to the converted, because for everything I say here in this context, all of you kind of out there or here with us, we'll have your perspectives, we'll have your realities. And so I'm very, very aware of the danger of trying to put forward a standardized view when really there is a great deal of personalization. You all have your own realities and you'll be packing your own suitcase with kind of the things that you need for the journeys that you need to go on in order to enable the effectiveness and the sustainability of your organizations. Also, just something I should have said at the very beginning in terms of the actual flow of this experience here today with Christine and I. I'll probably be talking for somewhere close, we'll be discussing these points for maybe 40 minutes or so. And so that'll leave us a good chunk of time for the last 15 or 20 minutes for questions. So as we go through this experience, if you want to kind of start putting your questions into the chat box, Christine will kind of start to moderate them and pick the easy ones for me, or kind of pick the difficult ones. Let's see which way that goes. And we'll have time at the end to ask questions. So I think I can remember the question now, Christine, around the outputs from the LAI, leading the AI-driven organization. I think I'd be wise here to kind of lean on one of my colleagues, Ramakrishnan, who I've heard on a few occasions recently talking about a 3-step process when it comes to the application of generative AI. The 3 steps, and Rama, if you're kind of listening in, I apologize for kind of not speaking as eloquently and articulately as you do about all of this. But The first step of the process being to actually look at a job or a workflow in terms of its constituent tasks. Okay, so a number of us sitting here today will have applied for a job and kind of read a job description, a role description, and there are all those maybe 10 or 15 bullet points. Thinking a tiny bit in that type of way, but also taking a couple of steps back from the role, just in your own mind, in your mind's eye, everybody. Just think for a moment, if you were tasked to look at the constituent activities within your role, what would it actually look like? And the point that Rama makes is that allows us then to actually consider whether each task can be done safely with generative AI. And if it can be done safely with generative AI, he almost implores or suggests that we move forward and build and launch a pilot of sorts that allows us to collect data and kind of get insights that we can action and move forward with in our organizations. And so I suppose, again, to kind of lean on Rama's kind of insights, there are probably within those 3 steps, 3 questions as well. The first question being, okay, let's ask ourselves, what's the cost of using generative AI for a particular task or set of tasks in our organizations? Secondly, what's the cost of potentially detecting errors? Well, not potentially, of detecting the errors and the mishaps. And thirdly, is the cost of a miss acceptable? And the reason I really hone in on this third one as well is because if the cost of a miss is unacceptable, really we're going to have to think whether that's the right type of task or activity to be launching a pilot upon. Okay, a number of us will have seen, I think it was back in February, but we could look at any kind of newspaper in any country on any given Sunday, and kind of see a similar example of the Air Canada case, where Air Canada blamed the chatbot for giving kind of poorly expressed information to their customers. So in that case, the miss turned into a very precarious and very dangerous kind of PR kind of debacle. And so really very important for us to think about those 3 points: the cost of using generative AI, the cost of defining and catching any issues, and then really the risk associated to actually moving forward with the use of generative AI in those tasks. And so as I think about taking that step further, as we think about, well, okay, where is the cost of a miss acceptable? Perhaps it explains why we've seen over the last 12 to 15 months great uptake of generative AI in those knowledge work tasks where you have a human in the loop, or you have reinforcement learning from human feedback, or where really if there is an error, it's not going to be so problematic. And so what we've seen from a starting point of using generative AI and large language models to actually help us write simple programs for creative, artistic type of work, largely in written content. So, HR, in job descriptions, performance reviews, from an e-commerce perspective, product descriptions, a number of chatbots, of course, sales and marketing types of materials. And as we move forward, we're of course going to see AI automating, but also assisting and augmenting our knowledge work in a number of broader areas. As the context windows get larger, as the capabilities develop, as the actual models themselves become less inclined to hallucinatory types of activities, then we're likely to see decisions being made around, well, okay, the cost of a miss is acceptable, or there are activities we can take that allows us to kind of catch the error before we actually get to that stage. And so as I think really about the leading the AI driven organization program, that's a key element of what we're trying to do, I suppose, and in fact, with all of the programs that we have in our suite of AI kind of offerings, is to really give people the capability and the confidence to be able to move forwards, to be able to understand key elements and key principles around these technologies, but to be able to put them to work in our organizations. So I heard Christine say at the beginning around frameworks to capitalize on kind of AI in our organizations. Well, the types of frameworks that we would put forward in that type of case is something like the double helix model that we talk about in the program, where we're actually unifying the physical and the digital worlds that we all operate in. But if you think about a twisted ladder type of structure, what we're suggesting is that the actual rungs of the ladder are actually human-centric genes. So the role that creativity, curiosity, collaboration, critical thinking, consilience even, play in enabling us to actually get the most from AI in our organizations. But of course, it's not simply a question of frameworks. There's also that cultural element, where we move from a command and control set of approaches accelerating past ones that are kind of formulated on collaboration and cultivation to exploring and engaging approaches. And a big point in this regard as well around how we actually get value from AI in our organizations is understanding the role of language. Noam Chomsky has stated on a number of occasions that the principal function of language is not to communicate, but rather to link interfaces. And we think that's kind of a nice way of thinking about the recalibration of the human and machine partnerships as we move further and further into this era of AI and generative AI.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Paul. You kind of talked through a little bit about like some key steps that business leaders can take, but what guidelines or best practices can organizations follow to ensure they're using Gen AI responsibly and ethically? That's I think that's the question at hand for a lot of folks.
So it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, if we just take a step back, almost like those pointillist artists, when you stand in front of a mosaic, it's really hard to make out the picture, isn't it? Kind of, it's hard to tell what you have in front of you standing up too close to it. So I invite you kind of figuratively, don't want you to kind of fall off your chair or anything, but take a few steps back from this whole kind of discussion or debate about AI and think about the way that you're working with AI today. Think about kind of the last meeting or two, or conversations or discussions you've had. Could be in the corridors, could be in meeting rooms, could be on Zoom types of calls. Who was in the room? What team of teams are you actually building around AI and generative AI? What diversity, what breadth of opinions are you bringing to the table? Because we would probably argue, I think it's a reasonable argument to make, that AI, generative AI, are part of a general purpose technology of AI and machine intelligence that's permeating all aspects of our organizations, of society more broadly. And so when we find ourselves in that case, really everything is going to be impacted in one shape or form by kind of the developments in the AI area. And so acting responsibly, acting ethically, acting with a sense of fairness is going to become very important. And it's going to become very important, not just to try to counter some of the challenges that generative AI and AI provide, for example, inaccuracies, irrelevance of kind of outputs, bias, although of course bias is in the eye of the beholder, not only the model, but toxicity, questions of kind of offensiveness, of hallucinations, etc. So yeah, of course, we all want to counter those or turn the gas down on those. And I think to do so, we need to accept the responsibility that we have in our organizations. And maybe if I just super quickly, kind of, Christine, share four or five kind of practices that I think are useful. Firstly, and these are based on the conversations we've been having with organizations across a broad range of industries over the last couple of years. Firstly, I would say ensure that you're working towards leadership alignment. Okay, so we often, depending on your industry, it might be more pronounced than others, but I think most of us will have kind of grown up or experienced. I don't like the word silos, but definitely functional kind of groupings within our organizations, even at the CXO types of levels. And I think for CEOs and leaders and the boards of companies, it's incredibly important today and moving forward that we actually align our leadership around an AI vision that reflects the responsibilities of the organization as it stands today, but also the responsibilities that they want to take on board as they move forward with their future visions. Also, addressing human factors, that's the second point I would say. Addressing human factors from the get-go, from the very beginning. And by this, I mean things including the workforce, transparency with the workforce, to allay their fears, to actually spell out the realities of certain situations. Yes, not, or I should say no, not all jobs will kind of continue in their current shape and format, given the growing capabilities and developments in AI. History, although it's difficult to kind of lean too heavily on history when you're talking about kind of human impacts, okay? It's not very consoling for those that do lose the jobs, the fact that previous technology revolutions have told us that we always create new jobs and new opportunities. What we need to be doing is kind of helping people today with the roles and the responsibilities they have. So we can either help them with their skill sets and training, but also help ourselves to understand what's the reality of the workforce that we're actually sculpting moving forward. I think also it's based on the conversations I have with so many clients and customers, is how important it is to actually build a governance framework, to not just to build a governance framework, but also to go a step further, perhaps. Where I've seen governance frameworks work very well, or relatively well, is where they've had a focal point of leadership. So somebody or a particular group, and somebody in particular kind of taking accountability, have actually been tasked with kind of spinning this up and bootstrapping it and kind of getting it kind of up and running. And that in itself actually feeds into what I think is a very important kind of opportunity around creating shareable content, reusable content that explains what the company's vision for AI actually is and where it sits today against that vision and what it's doing, and making sure that everybody in the organization, that these materials and assets are provided in a way that everybody can understand, or different groups can understand, and can actually reuse them in their own internal and perhaps even external communications. So codifying best practice into your platforms, I think, is incredibly important as we move forward. So hopefully there's some interesting ideas or interesting frameworks in there, Christine.
Yeah, certainly. There certainly are.
Mhm.
So Paul, pivoting slightly, your work in research covers a range of disruptive technologies, AI, ML, AR, VR. How can businesses harness these technologies to convert challenges into opportunities for sustainable growth?
Well, I think there are a number of tools and techniques that we can take advantage of. And again, I'm kind of beseeching you, kind of imploring you to kind of take a couple of steps back from kind of the picture and kind of just to see the colors and the contours a bit more clearly. One of the things I'm sure most of you have kind of gathered from your interactions with MIT is that we tend to spend quite a bit of time formulating and framing the problems before we kind of press go. And we tend to look at problems through different lenses. We tend to look at different types of data sets and kind of patterns just to apply different lenses and prisms to help us understand, help us ensure that we're actually framing the problem the right way before we press go and start kind of, rocketing off, kind of doing a lot of work. And some of the techniques and approaches that I think are very useful today include kind of recognizing or using tools such as paradox and dualities to our advantage. This might seem a bit abstract, so let me kind of try to be clear and explain kind of more in a better way. So paradox, I think, is a very, very underrated kind of tool when we find ourselves in challenging kind of new situations. We can kind of rely on paradox to kind of allow us to look at things from different perspectives. So, for example, when we think about the recalibration of human and machine capabilities, partnerships, how we work together, how we interact together in our organizations and outside of them, I think we kind of have an inclination to kind of think back to maybe something like Moravec's paradox, which kind of tells us that oftentimes, what's incredibly difficult for humans can be easier for machines, and vice versa. To build a robotic unit that has the sensory motor or perceptory skills of a 6-month-old human toddler would be, or is still, incredibly difficult. Whilst on the other side of the coin, that there are so many things in terms of the kind of pattern recognition capability of AI technologies that humans can just not get anywhere near. So Moravec's kind of paradox helps us kind of create a sense or an appreciation of what humans and machines might be doing in terms of tasks. And of course, the lines are blurring because of the power of AI today and into tomorrow. But also Polanyi's paradox, which in a nutshell says that as humans, we know more than we can tell, really hinting at this kind of, and in fact, the Polanyi paradox takes its name from a paper by MIT's David Autor, the economist, incredible kind of researcher and kind of incredible insights. But Polanyi's paradox of as humans, we know more than we can tell, really gets to the nub of this question of the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. Okay, and what we're seeing, of course, with developments in AI and generative AI models is that some of the capabilities or the distinction between what was a human type of activity and what was a machine type activity are kind of changing. The plates are shifting beneath our feet on this type of stuff, to such a degree that I think we need to take into consideration a third paradox, one that we call, in my work on algorithmic business thinking, we call the potentiality paradox, which really builds on this idea of the double helix of kind of the human-centric genes, and suggests that if you were to think about these disruptive technologies, whether it be AI, machine learning, extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, compute, cloud, and any of these types of disruptive technologies, think of them as a New York kind of skyscraper. And we would say that the potentiality of these technologies maybe resides on the 85th floor. But in all honesty, where does the actual UX or the way that you're building these technologies into your organizations actually sit today? If we were to be honest, it's probably 20th, 25th, 30th type of floor. There's a lot of scope to kind of get closer and harness more of the potentialities. The argument being that if we want to create this elevator from the 30th floor to the 85th, we're going to have to focus on empowering our kind of employees and our workforce. Creativity is going to be key. Curiosity, giving people permission to experiment, to explore, not always to get the results that might have been expected, but always to learn from those results to do the very next thing as well. So the potentiality paradox relies on human-centric capabilities in order to realize the capabilities of the technologies we have at our disposal. Then the dualities, I think that there are lots of kind of very interesting dualities with technology innovation and the technologies that we have with us today and will have into tomorrow as well. The first one, you've heard me comment upon AI as being a general purpose technology. I might even go as far as to suggest that we're actually living through, in Stephen Jay Gouldian terms, a punctuated equilibria, where these technologies are actually disrupting the status quo in a way that means the things that made us successful over the last 5 years are not going to be the things that make us successful over the next 5. So what are we to do? And I think the kind of idea of borrowing or leaning on the metaphor of punctuated equilibria from Stephen Jay Gould and biological evolution actually links into technology innovation and into organizational innovation and invention as well. But what I mean by this is that there's a certain relationship where fundamentally simplicity creates complexity. And please stick with me for a second on this while I try and explain what I mean. So it's very interesting to me from a biological or evolutionary kind of perspective that we know how it works. Yeah, we kind of have mutations, genes kind of develop, those that survive get absorbed into the organism, and we move forward in that particular way of natural selection. But it's what I find particularly kind of interesting is, well, the actual algorithm or the actual rules are pretty simple. But over a period of time, them being replayed and replayed and replayed and replayed pushes or transforms the complexity from the actual organism into the model, and kind of we develop in that particular way. And I think we're seeing something similar with AI as well, where as we look at the transition from AI into machine learning into deep learning, what we actually kind of have visibility of are simple rules that kind of played out with neural nets and deep neural nets and kind of other techniques as well, actually allows a great deal of complexity to be pushed into the model. But the actual outputs continue to improve, and the outputs continue to improve. And so it leads me to think that kind of in our organizations, we would be well served to kind of think about this duality of simplicity creating complex kind of outcomes, and think about the simple rules, the 4 or 5 simple rules in our organizations that could also almost act as our kind of code of natural selection. What are the simple algorithms that we can keep applying so that we can move forward? And one of them, it's another duality, is that of actually, this time I'm borrowing on the work of Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast and slow, almost having a fast and slow enterprise AI strategy. So over the last 12 to 18 months, all of us here will have experimented with proof of concepts and pilots. And that's great, isn't it, in the short term, doing those experiments, running those experiments so we collect data. And what I'm getting at here is, how does that data then inform the longer term or the slower kind of enterprise strategy for the next 15 to 18 to 21 to 24 months? So there's an interesting duality there. And I think all of us would be well served to consider how we might operate a dual kind of enterprise strategy in our organizations. And of course, the last example I'd give Christine around this is the duality of kind of humans and machines themselves working together. So we know that humans and machines work effectively. Humans have used technology as a tool for the longest time. But how do we actually fine tune this and recalibrate it in our organizations so that we're developing trust, that we're actually developing the confidence, so that we actually know which of those tasks and activities can be better served by the machine than the human, or vice versa, and what's the process? I often think when I play around with ChatGPT and kind of large language models, that ultimately the brainstorming that I do, for example, at the beginning of a project with those types of tools, can take me sometimes as far as 80% towards an answer. But then we're left with this almost last mile engineering question. And I think for all of us here, this last mile engineering is super important as we think how we're going to use AI, generative AI, or in fact, any of those other technologies, XR or cloud compute, etc., that you talked about, Christine.
Yeah, that last mile engineering is a really good way to express that. That's very articulate, Paul. I think it resonates with a lot of people. We're getting a lot of buzz in the chat, which is great. Thank you for your questions. Paul, if I'd like to take a pause and kind of answer maybe or address some of the themes that we're seeing being raised in the chat. So there's a lot going on around governance and standardization towards regulations on Gen AI. Can you share some insights on that topic?
Yeah. So again, there are a number of different lenses and prisms that we might look through here. I'm going to pick a couple just to be concise. I think guardrails and guidelines are going to be incredibly important, as they were in all of the other technology revolutions or evolutions that we have kind of lived through. We're living in a time of wonder, aren't we, really, where the world of bits and bytes has kind of been bridged with the worlds of atoms and molecules, and that gives us a lot of kind of potentialities. But how are we going to grow? How are we going to build the foundations of our society, of our organizations, of our interactions in a way that foundation will actually kind of allow us to build high and to build strong? And so I think, spent a lot of time over the last months looking at the various various outputs from the World Economic Forum, from the European Union, of course, in the US as well, around different bills and different acts that kind of look at this. And so some of the common themes that they actually see, I suppose, are actually around almost hyper collaboration. Okay, I think what we're seeing, what we're going to see, is no one organization, and kind of we can maybe come back and look at this in a year's time. It's very unwise to get into predictions and all the rest of it, but I suspect that no one organization or no one country necessarily is going to be able to find all of the answers. But we have some very pressing questions and problems, whether it be the sustainability of our organizations, whether it be transport, poverty, war, climate. Maybe that should have come closer to the top of the list. That they're all very complex problems. And so in order, with AI and fueled and armed and kind of, well, shouldn't use that word, of course, enabled by AI, we have the potentiality to actually make massive inroads to all of those problems and move towards solutions. But we can only do so if we're prepared to collaborate and work together. So I think some of the points I made earlier are very important here as well, Christina, around actually setting up governance boards, actually setting up teams of teams in our organizations that cover all the bases that are going to be impacted by AI. So that could be, for example, obviously the technology kind of people in our organization, the technology groups, but also the HR, the finance, the legal, the marketing, functional representation pretty much from everybody. And perhaps even thinking about some of the ethicist or philosopher or social science kind of elements as well is going to be very important for us. So beginning by setting up our own governance boards, working then with others in our industries and across industries to understand the best practices, so we can potentially put forward a series or create a series of shared kind of positions that will lead into standards and protocols for the way that we work with these technologies. Can I just say something very, very quickly? A year or so ago, there was that letter, wasn't there, signed by 1,300 kind of AI kind of leaders and research scientists, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that was truly an effort necessarily to pause the development work on AI, but really a shot across the bows to actually say, look, we're going to have to take this very seriously and we're going to have to come together and work together on this. And I think we can all see the potentialities of AI. We need to mitigate the risks where we can, but the only way to do this is going to be with a sense of hyper collaboration where we come together and work together.
That's great, Paul. Do you have any insights to share on those industries that kind of lag behind a little bit, are a little more traditional or slow to kind of adapt and kind of take on some of these technologies?
Yeah, so I think, even as I kind of think about this before I even say a kind of a beatitude kind of springs to mind, that the meek will inherit the earth. Yeah, that I don't think there is a single industry or organization that won't be or can't be positively impacted with AI or negatively impacted for that matter, two sides of a coin. And there isn't any leadership team that can't become incredibly proficient at navigating the waters of AI. I think there are certain industries that probably have a head start, because what we've seen over the last year from a research perspective shows that almost kind of a double kind of effectiveness or kind of increase in productivity from industries that already had processes that could be reused with AI and machine learning. So technology companies, finance organizations, in some cases healthcare, because they've been working with a lot of technology and innovation over the last periods, versus or compared to industries such as legal, as certain aspects kind of horizontally of HR and other areas where perhaps they hadn't had the exposure to technologies over a long enough period to create the muscle memory in their workforce to be able to adapt effectively. Doesn't mean that the natural selection can't work just as well. It just means that kind of the duality of kind of short-term and long-term needs to be kind of recalibrated for those industries, so that they can kind of get up to speed more quickly and move forward in a way where they're kind of catching up and potentially overtaking the kind of the other industries that might be working with AI.
Yeah. Are there any concrete AI applications that business leaders should be kind of focusing in on?
Yeah, I think concrete. I think looking at kind of the areas where research is showing kind of big inroads are being made. So that knowledge work, yeah. So thinking about the knowledge work that you do that gets undertaken and done in your organizations, decomposing it, breaking it down to understand the various activities, and then looking at those activities and determining which ones could be successfully kind of delivered with AI or generative AI today is going to be very useful. So we've seen a lot, haven't we? You know, I gave a few examples earlier around in HR or kind of sales or marketing, product brochures, role descriptions, positioning of kind of products and services to particular personas. So if you had kind of 5 personas or 5 types of groups that generally have been buying your product, to be able to personalize your messaging, either in chatbots or kind of through kind of LLM types of activities and brochures and all the rest of it, to actually kind of create solutions, to create kind of materials that actually fit those personas a little bit better. And so that allows, using generative AI, you know, potentially kind of complete those tasks maybe in half the time, which gives you an interesting kind of productivity question around what do you do with that extra kind of time or the extra resource that you have. You can use it for cost saving. You can use it for kind of for growth purposes as well. So, you know, we've seen a lot of automation of activities. We're seeing a lot today, current frontiers of generative AI around assistant types of models. We're going to see, and we are seeing, kind of the ways in which generative AI can augment our work. One thing I would say as well, kind of just a consideration, I was thinking about this morning around the way that I truly use kind of generative AI. And what dawned on me is that it's kind of changed over the last 18 months. Maybe kind of, you know, when we were kind of going through the launch of ChatGPT and kind of getting used to it, etc. I kind of probably used it later on in my workflows than I do now. I probably use it more often now at the very beginning of my workflow for brainstorming and a bit of an assistant. You know, I'm not trying to kind of take any shortcuts, I promise. Not trying to take any shortcuts, but more trying to kind of gain some different perspectives to help me frame the problems, and almost feel that kind of these large language models are kind of by my side as we actually work through various projects. So if anything has surprised me over the last 15 or 18 months, it might be the degree to which something like ChatGPT 4 or kind of 4 Turbo or any of these types of models, the way in which they've become an assistant to me, how early in a process I actually use them, and the actual efficiency of the user interface and the product itself. And maybe in this, there's an important lesson for all of us is, okay, so how do we actually create the value and the impact? How do we create similar or kind of user interfaces that fit our realities or our customers' realities with generative AI? How do we create those products? And as a starting point, I tend to look at kind of what's happened, what OpenAI has done to me over that period. So I think I invite everyone on the call just to think about your own experience with these models and think about where you use them, when you use them, how you use them, and how that can be improved upon. But not really just taking on board other people's kind of use cases and kind of examples, but thinking what fits your reality. Where can they be used to create value? And that might be in a completely different unit of measurement to any that we've used or, you know, up to this point in our organizations. The metrics of value that we can create with these generative AI models for our clients, existing and emergent, might be very, very different. And so we need, again, I think, to be able to take a couple of steps back so we can reflect on what's going on. And I would very much advise or kind of suggest to all of you, and please don't laugh at this suggestion because I know how busy you all are, but to be putting 15 or 30 minutes in your weekly calendars to reflect and just to think about and to practice and play around with these types of models, just to start to get an increased feel, more than you already have up to this point, and be asking yourself the question of what does this really mean for your clients and customers?
Yeah, that's great. So Paul, looking ahead and thinking forward a little bit, what emerging trends in Gen AI or AI more broadly do you think leaders should be aware of, and how can they prepare their organizations to stay ahead in this rapidly evolving field?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of focus in or hone in on generative AI for a few minutes on this one, okay? And then if anybody has broader questions around AI, they can kind of please feel free either to ask them here or to approach me via LinkedIn or kind of just send me an email, of course. So in fact, we're kind of creating this new program, aren't we, called the Frontiers of Generative AI in Business. And one of the neat things about this, just from a starting point, is that we fully recognize and expect and are excited by the fact that we'll deliver this program 3 or 4 times a year. And each time, I believe that the frontiers will be different because we're progressing at such a speed. So as we kind of sit here kind of today in the summer of 2024, I think, yeah, we can fully expect kind of large language models to continue developing. We can very much expect a lot of increased capability to come via multimodal generative AI. So not just language and image, but kind of broad range of kind of inputs, creating a broad range of outputs, and the complexity kind of sitting in the middle there in the model. Generative AI assistance, I think that's going to be an area of great growth. And I think also kind of customer experience, and I say customer experience in terms of us all being customers of kind of the large language models and the LLM kind of vendors, and increasingly kind of accelerating open source kind of offerings as well. But I think up to now, and maybe I'm being a bit generous here, the large language models might kind of be able to take us, in the best cases, to somewhere kind of close to 80% of the answer. But isn't it interesting to think, well, how are they going to actually try to work with the remaining 20% over the next period? So again, one of the things I find myself doing is trying to recognize when I'm playing around with these models, what are the things that they don't do very well? Okay, what are the things that kind of I'm finding are still kind of very much sitting in the human domain? Because I suspect kind of organizations like the ones I've already mentioned, OpenAI, Microsoft, all the usual kind of players, et cetera, DeepMind, Google, of course. Within those companies, you can bet your bottom dollar that they're actually focusing on the things that the models can't do yet, as well. So I think we can see those types of frontiers. What should we do to kind of to meet them or to answer them? Well, I mentioned something before around kind of last mile engineering, Christine, that you picked up on. I think that's kind of interesting for us to think in those terms. Also a flipped thinking type of approach, because I found myself often over the last period thinking around, well, how can generative AI help me? Yeah, it'll help me in my particular tasks and activities. How about though I flip that a little bit, and what are the ways in which these generative AI models can be ably supported by human activities? So, it's a tool, but we're not abdicating any of our responsibility. We're trying to find the best ways to incorporate it into our existing toolkits and our mindset and all the rest of it. So coming at this from the angle of kind of, okay, so the humans bring this to the party, and then kind of the gaps are filled with these kind of components from the large language models or generative AI or multimodal generative AI, et cetera, I think is kind of interesting. So I would keep in mind as well this 3A type of model that I've kind of touched upon, of automating, yep, okay, assistance, yes, but also augmentation. And none of this is actually going to come to fruition or actually going to be translated to value or an impact in our organizations or systems unless we keep exploring and give ourselves and everybody around us suitably wise permission to experiment and to potentially fail, or at least get results that weren't expected, and then be able to work with those to move forward.
Yeah, yep, that's great. Paul, do you think that organizational leaders are a little too ambitious in looking to Gen AI to facilitate better or faster decision making? And how do you temper that drive to use AI versus selecting the right things that you need to use AI for?
So the first thing I would say is that, you know, I've the last couple of years have been really interesting because I've seen something that I hadn't seen in my career before. You know, I was in telecoms kind of when the internet kind of happened. You know, high capacity optical networking was my thing, and that kind of turned things upside down for us, etc., etc. And you know, within months, we had people in the garages and kind of in the lofts and the basements, kind of creating apps and doing kind of super exciting stuff. Seeing all of that this time around as well, but it's slightly different. That maybe it was because I didn't have as many of these conversations back in 1998 or 97 as I'm having here in 24 around the impact of this disruptive or ruptive kind of set of technologies. I've never seen as many CEOs and CXO teams be as focused and sometimes even nervous as I've seen them over the last couple of years. And two common denominators from all of the conversations I've had over the last 2 years. Firstly, time. Senior leaders. So I have great empathy and sympathy and respect for every single kind of senior leader that I've spoken to about this type of thing. They feel, whether it's correct or not is kind of open to discussion, they feel they've got 12 to 15 to 18 months to come up with a strategy. Yeah. Or actually, more than that, to actually have an enterprise strategy that's going to deliver sustainable growth for their organizations. They feel a great sense of threat from the competitive advantage or differentiation others in their industry can have if they're able to apply these technologies quicker than they can. That's point number one. And secondly, the second common denominator I see across all of these conversations is a concern that they don't possess the technical critical thinking capabilities necessary to make the right decisions or kind of defensible decisions around their kind of technology purchases at the moment. Okay, so put it all together, kind of the question of time, the question of critical thinking. I can only suggest that the duality of the short and long kind of play, and when I say long, I mean kind of 18 to 24 months, and when I say short, I mean 6 weeks to 3 months to kind of 4 months. That needs to come together. That needs to be unified. That's where the aspect of consilience comes back in, the idea of unity and unification, because those two components together, the thinking fast and slow, short and long, whichever way you want to look at it, that duality will allow you to get the data, build kind of your data strategy, and then actually kind of be able to grow from there into your enterprise strategy. And I suppose, Christine, I should say, across all of the companies that I've interfaced with over the last couple of years, all of them are asking themselves three questions. One, what's my people strategy? Two, what's my data strategy? And three, what's my enterprise AI strategy? Yeah. And that thinking fast and slow, that kind of duality of fast and slow or short and long is kind of a key component, I believe.
Yep, great. Thank you. So Paul, we have someone in our audience, a quick shout to Sandra S., who's taken LAI, ABT, and Gen AI, and she's looking forward to another in-person course, which is so fantastic. We're really looking forward to seeing you in another program, Sandra.
Sorry, can I just comment, because just shout out, but kind of a big thank you as well to Sandy. I didn't know Sandy was attending. This isn't kind of set up or anything. Just the point I want to make is, when we ran the Leading the AI-Driven Organization, that was for the first time back in April, we had a great kind of cohort, 59, 60 kind of participants. And Sandy kind of was instrumental in making sure that we created a real network, okay, of learners. to the degree where kind of we still have our WhatsApp thing going strong on our kind of telephones, and we still have kind of our LinkedIn kind of group. And I think this is super important, that anything that we kind of, or anything you all do in this space, is around building, I wouldn't say alliances, but building kind of relationships that allow you to improve your dexterity with AI, digital language, those types of elements. Because like all languages, AI is something that's kind of improved as a result of listening, not speaking, listening. And that's the way kind of natural languages kind of function, of course, as well. And so people like Sandy are instrumental. And, a big thank you, Sandy, for everything you contributed to the LAI program when we ran it, but very much the way that you've been able to support it moving forward as well. So thank you very much.
So Paul, I think that's a really great segue into this next question that I have, right? So we have, you said it earlier, but I'm going to say it again. We have a new course, very exciting new program coming out on Gen AI, Frontiers of Generative AI in Business. What can participants expect from that new course? What can you share a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the MIT mission, MIT values. Surprise, surprise, it's going to be, practical, kind of application based, we're going to try our very best. There's Patrick Winston, the MIT AI pioneer. You can check it out on kind of YouTube. He's got this presentation around how to speak. And one of the things he says is very important is that whenever you stand up in front of a group of people to do your thing, you should kind of make an enablement promise. Okay, what are you going to give them? What are they going to have at the end of this kind of thing that you're doing that they haven't got at the beginning? Okay, and I think I like this idea. So thinking about the frontiers of generative AI in business, we're going to do our very best, and we don't mind kind of taking the responsibility for making a commitment to this. That we're going to give you what you need in order to be able to use generative AI effectively. Not in 6 months' time or a year's time, but kind of by the time you leave the program. And so it's this kind of, again, it's another duality, I suppose. It's this connection of capability and confidence. Of course, there's only so much you can kind of teach and so much capability building you can do in a couple of days, but you can definitely create a bit of a mindset and an approach that can be then taken away, so that increasingly we can kind of frame our problems, we can break them down into their constituent parts, we can use generative AI as part of a broader toolkit and set of strategies to actually kind of separate the noise from the signal, kind of focus in on what we need to do, and build algorithms, for want of a better kind of word or sequence of instructions that allow us to get to the results. So we're really excited about the program. All we can say is that we'll try our best to kind of layer the program, almost like a neural net, I suppose, to kind of structure it in a way that we are able to provide outputs and useful kind of impact for everybody who attends. So we'd love to see you there, and we'd love, we'd love to have you kind of build ever stronger, closer ties with us. We're so grateful for everything you invest with us.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to that course, Paul. So a lot of interesting things coming from that one. So I'm really sorry we don't have time to answer all the questions. There was such good conversation happening in the comments and in the chat. Thank you so much for everyone today. We're just about at time. Paul, are there any closing remarks or anything else you want to impart on our group today before we close?
Two quick things. Big thank you, everybody. Thank you kind of the patience to listen to my meanderings. And secondly, kind of take the words of my NASA supervisor, Jim Garvin: never wait to wonder. Just carry on doing things. Just turn the gas up on what we're doing. Don't wait till tomorrow. The futures that we want for tomorrow are created by the things that we do today. They're not created tomorrow morning. They're created by the things you do before you go to bed. Okay, so just kind of do the small things, and kind of everything else will take care of itself. Okay, and to take care of yourselves as well. And good luck with everything you do. And it's a pleasure to have spent time with you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks everyone for being with us today.